everybody, and welcome to Final Play Sports. I'm your host, Pete Lubar, and today we are rapping about Central Florida. Did a little different format this week. We're going to actually had an interview with Rob Sheply of Witty, CFB, and I was a guest host, and so I'm going to provide that to you instead of me talking the whole time like I usually do. So I hope you enjoy this session, and please subscribe. Both of our sites are pretty interesting, so if you have an opportunity, subscribe to us, and hope you enjoy the show. Thanks.
Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we have Pete Lubar, founding member and managing member of Final Play Sports Media, avid college sports fan, particularly covering men's college basketball and football. And he also runs his own vlog, Final Play Sports Rap, which primarily focuses on the Big 12 and the Mountain West. And he's been covering the Big 12 since 1994 and also covering the Mountain West Conference since 1999, since its inception. Pete, it's great to have you on, and I'm definitely excited to talk some ball with you. And obviously, I'll have all your attachments as well in the description below.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to doing this as well. I love football, and spring football is getting going, and it's time to cover all the different Big 12 sports. A lot of stuff's come out, ranking the quarterbacks, ranking the teams, who had the best recruiting classes, and probably most importantly, the portal. Because a team like Central Florida, which we want to focus on today, has 62 portal additions or something like that. So with Scott Frost coming in as a new coach, the team left, and so he's basically starting over in a lot of ways. So that should be very interesting for Central Florida this year.
Yeah, and it's all things considered. I think maybe the writing on the wall was a little bit for Gus Malzahn in the sense that he probably felt, at least to some degree, that UCF probably didn't have the resources to really compete at a higher level compared to the Colorados of the world or the TCUs and all that too. So for him to take the job at Florida State, it wasn't entirely surprising, but yet at the same time, when you kind of sit around and you say to yourself, well, who would really make sense in terms of the UCF job? I guess Scott Frost kind of fit because he had a lot of his success in 2016 and 2017. And obviously, too, when, a lot of the time people will obviously not love a retread hire, but at the same time, too, as long as UCF's relatively patient with them, sometimes second time's a charm.
Yeah, we'll see if lightning strikes twice in a bottle, right? Because he had his best success in the American Conference, and no disrespect to the American Conference, but it wasn't quite as good as Big 12 football. And it's he got an opportunity in the Big 10, and he found out how difficult it is. Big 10 standards are way higher than a American football conference, and so he didn't have the greatest success there. So we're going to see. It's an interesting hire for sure. And Malzahn leaving, a little bit surprised, but he didn't have the greatest season. He probably felt some pressure. So he may have decided he was just a better offensive coordinator than he was a head coach. He really hadn't been all that successful. He had the try at Auburn, and then he had the try at Central Florida, and the records aren't all that great.
Yeah, especially too when, I go back and think of September, the October period when we were talking about UCF as potentially a ranked team. I mean, I go back and I remember they had KJ Jefferson, who, he transferred from Arkansas. He was supposed to be a big deal. And obviously RJ Harvey having that combo there, they had one of the best rushing attacks in the entire country. And then everything just kind of fell apart, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, which even for me, looking at this 2025 team, is definitely going to be one of their bigger issues, especially since they hired Alex Grinch as their defensive coordinator too, who obviously are USC fans or are Nebraska fans listening. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure they have a lot to say about him. So,
yeah. I mean, this is Scott's first year. He's got a bunch of transfers in. He got them from big schools mostly, so I think that's good. But everything's new. So you can't even look at this Central Florida team right now and look back to last year and think that anything's going to be the same, right? I think they're going to run a different offense. I think they're going to run a different defense, and then you bring in 60 transfers or 64, whatever that number is. You don't know what you got yet, and I think it's going to take them a couple of years um, to build that back up. I think this year will be a very challenging year for UCF. The Big 12 is loaded. You've got a good Arizona State team who's in the college playoffs. They've got their quarterback back. They're going to be good. Baylor's going to be good again this year. Kansas State's good. Iowa State's good. BYU's going to be excellent. So you're talking about a conference where wins are going to be pretty challenging, I think.
Yeah, not to mention too. I mean, all those things are going to be a challenge too. Not to mention just kind of the lackluster recruiting class that they had this year. They were ranked 70th in the country in recruiting, 16th in the Big 12, which is dead last too. And then you're also saying to yourself too, at the end of the day, UCF is an entirely different geographical area compared to all the other schools too, which adds a different layer too, because you're competing against the Floridas, you're competing against the Florida States, and then you're also competing against probably a lot of the SEC too, which obviously for our Big 12 schools that we just mentioned, for the most part too, I mean, a lot of those Iowa States of the world, for example, and Arizona's, they can really kind of hone in on their in-state recruiting and then, kind of filter around in terms of the transfer portal for some out-of-state kids to kind of plug in where they need them.
Yeah, it is tougher to recruit when you're one of the. It's funny to say Central Florida is a smaller school because they are like the largest school in the nation in terms of number of students.
Yeah,
but they are, they are competing against University of Miami, Florida State, Florida, Georgia. All those schools are, Kentucky. They're all picking kids from Florida, and even Texas goes to Florida. I mean, the big schools, Notre Dame, they're all doing national recruiting. But they got 4-star kids. They got a kid named Braden Charles, a 4-star from Boynton Beach. He's a receiver. They got a Rakeem Stroud, a 4-star defensive back from Tampa. Tony Williams is a 4-star defensive back from Miami, and you got Tavian Swint, who's a 4-star running back from Kissimmee. So you got 4-stars. The rest are mostly 3-stars, and then you have probably 10 kids at the bottom that are sort of unranked, and you never know what those kids will grow into. But you're right. The recruiting class for them was at the bottom of the Big 12 for sure. They were like 12th to 15th, depending on whose ranking you looked at, and that's probably not good enough. So,
yeah, because even when I kind of sat down and looked at this roster, in preview of this episode, there's obviously a bunch of different question marks as you mentioned, with just it being a rebuild, and Scott Frost is going to be putting his spin on things. And one of my big questions was, who's going to be the starting quarterback? And from what I've seen in terms of watching the spring game and kind of just doing a little bit of film watching, to me it seems like it's going to be Taven Jackson, who was Indiana's backup last year, and at least from what I can see, I think he fits Scott Frost's offense probably a lot better than anybody else there too. And, he only had a handful of snaps in Indiana, so it's not like we can really kind of dive into that too much. But at least from his perspective, it gives him a fresh opportunity. You have somebody who can probably is eager to sling the ball, especially with, him coming from Kurt Cignetti's offense too, who put up a lot of points last year. So we'll see if they can kind of translate that and put that together.
Yeah, I think you're right about Taven Jackson. He's a big kid, 6'4", 212, junior. He is pretty accurate. He only threw 37 passes last year, but 23 of them were completion. That's 62%, which is pretty good. And 349 yards, so a little less than 10 yards per completion. Those are pretty good numbers. They've got a backup, Jakari Brown, who's 6'4", 220, also a big kid. He's out of Georgia. He was quarterback 2 last year, and he had a good spring. So those are going to be the two main guys. If they have to go below that, they're in trouble.
Yeah, because especially too, I at least they're at the point now where they're going to be a little bit top heavy. You know what I mean? Like they're only going to have maybe 2 or 3 top receivers that we can probably sit down and say, okay, that's probably a guy you're going to have to watch on film. But otherwise, you're going to be relying a lot on some younger guys, probably some kids from some smaller schools, and
Yeah,
especially too. I mean, I know I've never sat down and watched a Scott Frost team and said, man, they're a really good rushing attack. We better watch out for that.
yeah. Well, they were never really good at anything in Nebraska, so it's hard to say. But they did add this kid DJ Black from Limestone, which is in I think the Southern League, so a D2 player. And they added Marcus Burke from Florida and a Dwayne Thomas from Charlotte, who was a pretty good player, and Chris Dommerkamp from Chattanooga. So I think you're going to see most of the production from DJ Black, Dwayne Thomas, and Chris Dommerkamp. The guy that I think they were counting on was Day Farmer from West Virginia. He transferred in, but then he had a season-ending injury during spring practice, so he's not available for the season.
Yeah, because I think that's the one thing that's kind of tough about UCF right now is, I think people already kind of skeptical about Scott Frost to begin with, and probably rightfully so to some degree with, if you think about his stint at Nebraska and whatnot too. But I think at the same time too, I guess your hands are tied a little bit because I know I kind of sat back and looked and thought about it. I was like, well, who else are they going to bring in that really makes a lot of immediate sense too? And I know, from
Yeah,
what you said too, obviously UCF is not like a small school in the sense of, in the sense of students or whatever, but in terms of how they're kind of handling their football program and some of their NIL resources, it does kind of feel like that to some degree compared to some of, when you're competing against Baylor and the TCUs of the world who,
yeah,
are just hemorrhaging money from donors and whatnot too.
yeah. You even worry, my one of my best friends is a KSU grad, and he's worried about this whole NIL thing because he doesn't think ultimately the K State is going to be able to compete. Texas Tech is spending money like it's free.
Exactly.
Um, they've got rich oil boosters, and they have spent just a tremendous amount of money. But you're right, TCU, Baylor, Oak State grads have, Oak State's got money, KU's got money. So yeah, and even Cincinnati's a pretty big market. They got money there too. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this all transpires over the next couple of years. A lot of talk, and we're free floating here right now, but a lot of talk about two conferences or two major conferences, 64 teams, and everyone else is out, and whether
Yeah,
they,
that's I mean, everybody's kind of putting their own spin on what they want for the college football playoff, and then it's the super conference talk, and then
yeah.
what happens to some of these other small schools too. So it's one of those things where love it or hate it, I'm kind of just along for the ride for the whole thing.
Well, it's either going to make it super cool or super bad. We don't know which.
Yeah, it's going to be. I feel like college football is going to be just like a Jackal and Hyde, where it's either going to be like, man, this is awesome, or no, I might just have to turn on the NFL and stick with Sundays.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Scott Frost is an interesting hire. He does have success there, so he knows the market. He brought some really good players in there, so he knows how to recruit. It, it's really he can play Big 12 football. It's big boy football. The Big 12 is every year they've got a bunch of good teams. And they have for 20 some years now of teams that are playing for national championships. And um, had one last year. Wasn't Arizona State was really a missed call away from beating was it Ohio State that they played, or was it Texas? I can't remember. Was it Ohio State, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, every team in that conference is loaded, wants to play. I didn't even talk about CU at all. Uh,
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's
we
you're already going down a rabbit hole
I'm
talking about that
spending some
too.
money too, right here in my backyard. But yeah, you've got 7 or 8 good teams, and I guess that's where the challenge will be for UCF probably this year. Um, they may make strides, but it's hard for me to see them winning more than 5 games this year.
Yeah, because kind of switching gears and talk about the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah,
Obviously we have question marks about the offense and whatnot, particularly some of the depth that they have. But I gotta tell you, I we talked about a little bit off camera, and we kind of talked about notes and whatnot too. But I think their defensive line and their front seven is probably the most experienced part of their entire program in general. And I think they can turn some heads, especially kind of compared to last year where they really couldn't get to the quarterback at all, and they had one of the worst passing defenses in the league last year. And you have to kind of imagine that that's something that Scott Frost and Alex Grinch and this staff are really going to have to hone down on if they have any chance at hitting the ground running in the Big 12.
yeah, for sure. The defensive line is on paper the most experienced and accomplished pair group within rushers and defensive tackles. You had a kid named Kelly, that defensive end who produced strong numbers for him: 53 tackles, 5.5 sacks. He was a leading sacker, 3 forced fumbles, so he's good. They've got some kids coming back. A kid named Walker missed all of 2024 with a torn meniscus. So that's where they're going to be strong. I think where they're going to be weak is linebacker. The linebacker group went up through an overhaul. They lost some kids to the pros. They lost a kid named Ziri Alexander, who transferred to his hometown Washington after the coaching change, and they had another kid named Andrew Harris who left for Arkansas. So after spring, so he just recently left. So it's going to be a little bit of a. We'll see what they got. They did get some transfers in. They got a kid named McDonald and a kid named Lawson who combined for 61 appearances on Virginia Tech's team. So they brought in some people, but linebacker will be their biggest challenge for sure.
Yeah, because I even on the defense side of the ball in terms of how they've been deciding on who to pick up in the transfer portal. That's the one thing I will give Scott Frost a lot of credit for. Is it seems like he definitely has kind of a specific vision in terms of what he's kind of looking for in terms of on the offense side of the ball. Well, hey, he's looking for guys who obviously have some size and a little bit of speed and get downfield and make some explosive plays. Where on the defense side of the ball, you're kind of sitting there and saying to yourself, hey, we're going to try to pick up some guys who can obviously help out on the edge, can tackle pretty well, and ideally be at a point where the offense can kind of do their thing and the defense can kind of just support that too, because that's the one kind of caveat to Scott Frost's offense is, well, you're going to have to lean in on that defense a lot more too, because they're going to be on the field a hell of a lot more. So that's one thing it seems like that they did was really tried their best to get a lot more depth in there too for some of these smaller schools that they kind of poached.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at who they transferred in, a lot of them were from big schools. So they got. It wasn't like they went out and got a bunch of D2 guys and they think that's going to be good enough. They went out and got kids from Kentucky and Ohio State. And I mean, they've got some good size coming in. The offensive line is mammoth. They got every guy across the offensive line that I think will start is most of them are 6'2" or taller and 300 pounds. I got a 6'10", 300-pound dude on the line. Crazy. So
Yeah,
it's a big 330, I think, 6'10", 330. So yeah, they're going to be big on that side of the line. But if you think about the kind of offense that they run, it's going to keep. It's what made Chip Kelly great. Boy, that offense was fast. It was confusing when he was at Oregon. It was awesome. And then, but they gave up 40 points a game too, because the defense was worn out by the first quarter. So we're going to see if he runs that same kind of offense, whether the defense that he's got right now will be sufficient enough.
especially too, you brought up a really good point that I think is worth mentioning. I know ESPN a couple months ago, they did a big article about Scott Frost, kind of talked about his stint at Nebraska, some of his regrets, and then obviously he spent a season or two being an assistant with the LA Rams, and that's probably one of the biggest stories that fascinates me is how Scott Frost really learned from his mistakes, because obviously people, Nebraska fans who are listening, are going to tell you, hey, he was one of the worst game managers, during that five seasons or so, where just countless one score games where more or less just sort of blew up. So I'm definitely kind of curious now that he's a little bit more mature and he's learned his lessons. How does that translate into 2025 too, especially when most of your success or your best success was pretty much 10 years ago, where, college football was a completely different game then.
Yeah. I don't know what he learned as a special assistant for the LA Rams. I don't know what part of did he focus on offense? I don't know. But if he learned some pro set stuff and he incorporates that, I mean, the Rams had a really good offense last year, especially at the end of the season. And, they crushed the Vikings in the playoffs, and they were a good team at the end, and they were good offensively. So if he was working on that side of the ball, I just don't know what special assistant means in the NFL, because that could mean you're pushing paperwork up.
Yeah, that he could be pushing paper for Sean McVay, or he can be doing scouting reports for
could be anything,
college
right?
guys. So that's just part of the story is, hey, he could be, how much, just is being away from the game to some degree, maybe help him at least initially. And then he kind of relies on the staff a little bit more to kind of guide him along, or is it just going to be a shit show that we're all on the ride for?
Yeah. Well, my expectation is that UCF will struggle this year, and I'm gonna look at the schedule real quick, because I wanted to see, there was a particular the challenge with the schedule is that they play most of the best teams in the conference on the road. So they play at Kansas State, they
Yeah.
play at Cincinnati, they play at Baylor, they play at Texas Tech, and they play at BYU. So you've got potentially four, maybe you win one of those. So let's say four losses right there. So if you hold serve at home, you have a decent season. You're 8-4 or 7-5, something like that. But if you don't hold at home, let's say you lose, North Carolina's coming in, Bill Belichick, they could potentially lose that. And so you're looking at a 5-7 kind of season, and maybe, 5-7 5-7 season, and maybe 3-6 in conference.
Yeah, because even too, you got West Virginia even thrown in there too. But
Oh yeah,
I talked with another, he's a Colorado guy, and another thing he kind of mentioned to me is that's what's most fun about the Big 12, in my opinion, is every year there's not like there's a clear Goliath. Like, you can probably argue there's a team or two, maybe, but for the most part, I could sit here and probably argue that a good 4 to 6 teams have a viable shot at really winning the conference championship. I mean, even look last year. I mean, I thought Oklahoma State was going to kind of take that next step and win it, but everything kind of just fell apart after that Arkansas game at the beginning of the year. So it's just,
yeah. Boy, that was a crazy year. No one expected Arizona State was predicted for last, and they had an outstanding year. The coach there does a great job, and so yeah, you're right though that there's going to be 9 teams in the Big 12 that are going to go to a bowl, and there's probably 2 that are going to be competing for the bowl championship and college football championship, whatever you call it now, whatever name it has. It's a tough conference. Every week you can win and you can lose. And I think back to BYU losing at home to Kansas last year, and that took them out of the college football championship. So, and Kansas didn't start off all that good last year, but by the end of the year, they're a pretty good team. and you got them on the schedule too for Central Florida. So it's going to be a haul this year, but what I expect is not so great this year, probably improvement next year. And if he can make the same magic happen, then maybe 2-3 years from now, they're at the top of the conference again. But it's football country out here. And I know Florida's football country too, but you have to understand how seriously Texas takes its football. And these guys all recruit Texas. And I had the opportunity to live in Dallas for 8 years. I went to high school football games and it blew me away. I grew up in New Mexico.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely blew me away. The size, they hold kids out of school so that they get an extra year to grow. The smallest kid on the field is the quarterback at 185 pounds, 6'2". All the offensive linemen are already 300 pounds and they're in high school. It's unbelievable. Different world, man. Friday Night Lights exists in Texas.
Yeah, especially too now in this day and age, college football, everything's just pretty much just a big arms race in terms of who's going to get there first, who has the best resources, and how do you kind of put that all together for it to be as consistent as possible? Because I mean, even we talked a little bit before about Indiana and how they pretty much turned it around in one season, and now these the donors and these athletic directors are going to sit there and say, well, if Indiana can do it, then why can't we? So just the threshold of how much time you really have to really instill a program and a vision, back, 10, 15 years ago, you had minimum 3 seasons, 3 to 5 seasons. And now 3 seasons in, if you're not don't have a winning record yet, they're finding an excuse to get rid of you at this point.
Yeah. It's surprising they even do 5-year contracts anymore. They should probably be doing 3-year. But you're right. The portal has changed everything. NIL money has changed everything. It's been really interesting to see. But kids, I talked to this guy who played at USC years ago, but tried out with the Broncos, whatever. And he said, kids don't go to school for facilities. None of that matters anymore. They go to get paid. And that's a different metric that we've been used to, right? And every year we're going to see you have to think of every kid is on a 1-year contract, literally, because if they can get more money, they're out the door, and you can't blame them, because if you can get that kind of money, it's life changing. And so we'll see. I think about, there's a kid named Devin Dampier, and this is way off topic, but Devin Dampier has transferred to Utah. I guess it's not that far off. But he was quarterback at New Mexico last year, dual threat quarterback, run, throw, unbelievable kid. He took New Mexico to 5 victories last year, which, New Mexico, they're terrible historically. The kid got like $1.5 million to go to University of Utah. Well, he's like 5'10", 100 and nothing pounds, right? He wasn't going to have a pro career, but he's got this year and next year probably $3 million in the bank. That you can't turn it down if you're a kid, and that's the shame of it. And unless they have some rules around it, which they don't want to do, because that's un-American. It is what it is right now.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's just at the end of the day too, the NCAA, when they tried to shut everything down with Tennessee, it was just one of those things where it just got to a point where everybody kind of just put their hands up and said, well, we're just going to let this ride and let the chips fall where they lay.
Is this the I am a Leva guy, the quarterback?
Yeah, Nico. Yeah, Nico. That was back when Tennessee wanted to pay him in high school.
Oh,
And they did. They did as a junior or senior, and then a year or two later, Nico turns around and pretty much tries to blackball Tennessee, trying to get him to pay more money. And then when they said they wouldn't, he was over ambitious in terms of who he thought he was going to get, and then ended up at UCLA for probably a third of the price.
Yeah, well, your market value is determined by the market now.
Yeah. Well, Pete, I appreciate being generous with your time and coming on, and I'm going to put all of your links and everything in the description so people can follow. But appreciate you being generous with your time, and looking forward to hopefully talking some Big 12 football again soon.
Yeah, Rob, really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you.